No,
Sir, stand up. You don't live here. Move along.
I do live here. You're on my steps.
ID now or cuffs.
I'm not resisting.
But you're about to arrest the owner because a stranger says so. Do it, and this camera becomes Exhibit A. You don't live here. I've never seen you before, and you need to move along now.
The morning sun had barely warmed the brick steps of 4321 Maplewood Avenue when Nathaniel Green leaned back in his chair, newspaper in hand, and sipped slowly from his steaming cup of coffee. The world was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional chirp of birds. He had spent decades in courtrooms, making others obey the law, but today he was simply a man enjoying the calm on his own property. A sharp voice pierced the serenity. "Sir, you can't just sit there. You don't live here." Nathaniel didn't look up immediately. He folded the corner of the financial section and adjusted his glasses. The voice was young, high-pitched, edged with irritation, an irritation he had learned to recognize as entitlement. "I heard you," he said finally, his voice calm, measured. "And I am exactly where I need to be." On the sidewalk below stood Elliot Monroe, 28, recently moved into the second-floor apartment, dressed in pristine workout gear that looked untouched by sweat. He pointed at Nathaniel with one hand while holding a phone in the other, his face flushed with self-righteous indignation. "This is a private residence. You can't just hang out here. People live here. It's not a park. You're making everyone uncomfortable," Elliot said, stepping closer to the wrought iron gate, but not crossing it. Nathaniel folded the newspaper neatly and set it on the small table next to him. The aroma of fresh coffee mingled with the crisp autumn air. "Uncomfortable," Nathaniel repeated, tasting the word like a bitter pill. "Who, exactly?" Elliot hesitated. I am. And other tenants will be when they see you." "Is that right?" Nathaniel asked, leaning back. "And what do you intend to do about it?" "I'll call the police if you don't leave," Elliot said, tapping his phone screen. He hit dial. 911, what's your emergency?" A dispatcher answered. "Yes, there's a man on the front steps of my building," Elliot said, trying to sound panicked. "He won't leave. He's aggressive. I don't feel safe entering my own home." Nathaniel stared silently, turning the page of his newspaper. "Unit is en route," the dispatcher confirmed. "Stay on the line and keep your distance." Elliot's smirk of triumph barely hid his anxiety. "You can still leave," he called up. "Save yourself the hassle." Nathaniel didn't respond. He knew the law better than the officer who would soon arrive. He knew property rights, curtilage definitions, and constitutional protections. He also knew something harsher: bias. The moment would not be about law, but perception. A young white man complaining about a calm, older black man on his own stoop. A few minutes later, Officer Jared Collins arrived. He was 27, 5 years on the force, known among colleagues as a hard charger. Collins saw the world in black and white. Authority versus chaos, good versus bad. Bias, often unexamined, guided his instincts. He had complaints in his file: discourtesy, use of excessive force, and allegations of bias. But he had remained on patrol. Today, he believed he was responding to a threat. He parked the cruiser, stepped out, and scanned the scene. On the sidewalk was Elliot, pointing, agitated. On the steps sat Nathaniel, calm, composed, sipping coffee. Collins's hand hovered near his holster, a reflexive gesture of power. "Officer, over here," Elliot called. "He's still there. He refuses to leave." Collins nodded, striding up the walkway with purposeful heaviness. He stopped at the bottom of the steps, looking up. "Time to move along. You can't stay here," Collins said, voice firm, designed to assert control. Nathaniel lowered his newspaper, gazed at the officer, and spoke slowly. "Good morning. I am not camping. I am on my property. I am the owner of this building. Collins's brow furrowed. He looked at the silk robe, the slippers, the calm demeanor. Something didn't fit. Do you have ID? Proof you live here. I am under no obligation to provide identification while enjoying my morning on my own property. No crime has been committed, Nathaniel said, his tone clipped but polite. Collins's face tightened. He had learned to expect resistance to authority, and he interpreted calmness as defiance. You are creating a situation that requires police action. Stand up, or I'll make you. I am not standing, Nathaniel said, each word deliberate. You are violating my Fourth Amendment rights. You have no probable cause. Your actions are based solely on the word of a man who moved in 3 weeks ago, against the owner of this building. The tension was palpable. Elliot backed up slightly, phone still in hand. Collins advanced a step. Last chance. ID or cuffs. Nathaniel stayed seated. I will not comply with unlawful detention. The first neighbors began to notice. Mrs. Franklin, an elderly woman watering her plants across the street, shouted, Officer, that is Mr. Green. Collins ignored her. A young man jogging past slowed. 2 women emerged from the apartment building, phones ready. You are escalating a non-existent situation, Nathaniel said, voice rising slightly, controlled anger in every syllable. I ask you to de-escalate and call your supervisor before making a grave mistake. I am the law here, Collins said, stepping onto the first stair. Hands behind your back. Nathaniel shifted slightly, his eyes locked on the officer. You are about to commit a legal error that will follow you for the rest of your life. I am compliant, not resisting. Your interpretation of resistance is biased. Collins grabbed Nathaniel's arm, yanking him from the chair. The sound of the teacup rattling was nearly lost under the hum of gathering witnesses. Nathaniel's old shoulder flared with pain, but he remained silent, going limp to avoid giving Collins an excuse. Stop fighting me, Collins shouted theatrically. I am not fighting, Nathaniel announced loudly. I am being assaulted on my own property. Neighbors recorded, whispers of shock spreading. The camera on Elliot's phone captured it all. The calm older man, the aggressive officer, the clear violation unfolding. Collins twisted Nathaniel's arm, ignoring the blood beginning to rise under the handcuffs. You're under arrest for trespassing, disorderly conduct, and resisting. On my own property, Nathaniel said, teeth clenched. I look forward to explaining this in court. The crowd was stunned. Elliot's smirk was gone. Wait, he owns this building? He stammered. Yes, Nathaniel said calmly. And your ignorance has now weaponized a police department against the lawful owner. Collins shoved him toward the patrol car. The indignity was immense. Nathaniel's legs were stiff, his hands numb. Witnesses murmured in disbelief. The officer was blinded by bias, failing to see the man, the law, or the truth. Nathaniel was placed in the cruiser. The door slammed. The smell of the vehicle assaulted him, but he remained calm, cataloging every violation, every detail for the record. Time, names, actions, everything would be noted. The tension of the moment lingered. A retired judge, handcuffed on his own stoop, an officer blinded by assumptions, and a witness unable to comprehend the chaos unfolding. Before the car pulled away, Nathaniel's eyes scanned the crowd. The morning that had begun peacefully had erupted into a spectacle of injustice, and he knew, deep in his bones, that nothing would ever be the same. The cruiser rolled slowly down Maplewood Avenue, engine humming loudly in the early morning. Nathaniel Green sat in the back seat, his robe wrinkled, wrists aching from the tight handcuffs, but his mind was razor sharp. Every detail of the encounter on his stoop was already logged in his memory. The time, the witness statements, Elliot Monroe's smug expression, the twisting of his arm by Officer Jared Collins. Nothing would be forgotten, nothing overlooked. Collins kept his eyes on the road, though he occasionally glanced in the rearview mirror, as if expecting Nathaniel to spring from the back seat. "Comfortable?" he asked, his voice trying too hard to sound casual. "Quite," Nathaniel replied evenly, though each word carried the weight of controlled fury. "Officer Collins, I suggest you recall this moment. You are about to learn what happens when ignorance meets authority." Collins let out a short, nervous laugh. "Everyone's innocent until proven guilty, right? You can tell that to a judge later." "I am the judge," Nathaniel said softly, letting the words hang in the air. Collins's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. He didn't respond. The streets blurred past, the city coming awake. Nathaniel's mind catalogued every procedural error. No Miranda warning had been issued. There had been no verification of ownership. Witnesses had been ignored. He had been assaulted under the pretext of an arrest. Each violation was a building block for the legal fortress he would construct. By the time they arrived at the precinct, Nathaniel had already formulated the strategy. He had 35 years of experience interpreting law, commanding respect, and exposing institutional failures. Collins, in contrast, had 5 years of adrenaline-driven patrol experience and a dangerous overconfidence in his authority. The metal doors of the precinct rolled down behind them. Collins killed the engine and stepped out, gesturing for Nathaniel to follow. The older man moved slowly, each step deliberate, maintaining dignity despite the discomfort of the cuffs. Inside, the air smelled of coffee, toner, and faint despair. A few officers at desks paused, noticing the handcuffed man in silk and slippers. Collins marched Nathaniel toward the main processing area, ignoring the murmurs. "Vance," one of the surgeons called out. "What's going on?" "Name's Collins." He corrected himself, pushing Nathaniel toward the bench. "Trespassing, disorderly conduct, resisting." Caller said he didn't belong on the steps. Refused to leave. Refused ID. The sergeant raised an eyebrow, glancing at Nathaniel. He stopped mid-sentence. Something about the man, his calm demeanor, the expensive robe, the commanding presence. It didn't match Collins's description of a loiterer. "Wait, you are—" the sergeant started, voice catching. "Yes," Nathaniel said quietly, his eyes meeting the sergeant's. "I am Nathaniel Green. I own the building at 4321 Maplewood Avenue, as well as the adjacent property. I have lived here for 35 years. Collins froze, his ego crashing against reality. You said." "I did not lie," Nathaniel interrupted. "You chose not to believe me. Your bias filled in the rest." The surgeon's eyes narrowed, shock and horror battling with professional duty. "Officer Collins," he said slowly, "you arrested the owner of the property on the complaint of a tenant." Collins swallowed hard. The caller said he was suspicious. Nathaniel leaned slightly forward, voice steady but sharp. "Officer, I have been compliant. I have been calm. You have ignored witnesses, violated my Fourth Amendment rights, used excessive force, and failed to verify ownership. This was not law enforcement. This was prejudice in action." The sergeant's expression hardened. "Captain Rossi, get down here immediately." Within minutes, Captain Elena Rossi, a reform-minded commander known for holding officers accountable, arrived. She took in the scene. Nathaniel Green handcuffed, Collins standing stiffly, the sergeant at attention. Her eyes locked on Nathaniel. Recognition and shock flickered across her face. "Remove the cuffs," she ordered, her voice decisive. Collins hesitated. Captain, he. Do it now, Rossi snapped. You have no authority here to continue this detention. Nathaniel flexed his wrists as the cuffs were unlocked. Thin red lines had already formed. He rubbed them gently, making a point of not raising his voice. Thank you, Captain, but this is far from over. Collins's face drained of color. The weight of what he had done, the procedural errors, the public humiliation, was settling in. I thought he was lying, he muttered, almost to himself. Because he is black, Nathaniel said, voice calm but cutting. Collins flinched. The room was silent except for the distant tapping of keys and the quiet hum of fluorescent lights. Rossi turned to Collins, eyes blazing. Your file shows 11 prior complaints. We retrained you. We mentored you. And today, you arrested a law-abiding property owner based solely on assumptions. You are placed on administrative leave, effective immediately. Sergeant, escort him out. Collins fumbled with his keys, finally placing his badge and firearm on the desk with a loud clatter. His career, built on arrogance and unchecked bias, was ending here, quietly, in shame. Nathaniel turned back to Rossi. Captain, I want a complete record of my injuries, the events, and witness statements. Document everything. This will not be an internal matter alone. The patterns here are systemic, not individual. Rossi nodded. Understood. We will proceed carefully. By mid-morning, the story had already broken on social media. Videos recorded by witnesses showed Nathaniel Green being forcibly removed from his own steps. The captions highlighted the bias, the excessive force, and the blatant disregard for law. The public reaction was immediate. Millions viewed the footage. Hashtags condemning the officer and praising Green trended nationwide. Meanwhile, Elliot Monroe, the tenant who had called 911, sat frozen in his apartment, watching the clip. His pride had dissolved into shame. The man he had assumed was homeless, a threat, and a nuisance was in fact the lawful owner, and his actions had triggered a national scandal. 2 days later, a legal team filed a lawsuit. Green v. City, Collins, et al. Nathaniel's decades of legal experience had been channeled into the filing, citing constitutional violations, failure of duty, and systemic negligence. It was comprehensive, targeting not just the officer, but the policies that allowed his behavior to persist. On the steps of his brownstone, Nathaniel addressed reporters, wrist bandages visible, robe immaculate, presence commanding. I am not here for money, he said firmly. I have resources. I am here for justice. If this can happen to me, what happens to the young man with no resources, the man who cannot articulate his rights, the person the system ignores? The press conference was meticulous. Questions were answered, details clarified, and the broader issue of systemic bias in law enforcement was exposed to the nation. Politicians, lawyers, and civil rights advocates weighed in. The city, facing immense public pressure, began internal reviews, policy revisions, and disciplinary actions. Back at the brownstone, Nathaniel sipped a fresh cup of coffee with his lawyer, 26-year-old Maya Jefferson, a passionate advocate he had hired to manage the new legal clinic funded entirely by the settlement money he anticipated. In every case, he told her, you fight not just the individual incident. You fight the system. Attack the root, not just the branch. Maya scribbled notes furiously. Understood. Policy reform, systemic change. Not just damages. Nathaniel nodded. Outside, the city was beginning to grasp the lesson. Bias unchecked leads to calamity. Authority without humility is tyranny. And for those willing to hold power accountable, the fight had only just begun. But Nathaniel's mind was already turning to the next case, the next injustice that required both skill and courage. The battle was far from over, but now he was prepared, and the public was watching. Across Maplewood Avenue, the morning sun cast long shadows, and Nathaniel Green returned to his stoop. Calm, composed, still seated on the steps of the building he owned. The fight had just begun. The lawsuit had barely been filed when the city began to feel the pressure. Nathaniel Green's team moved quickly, demanding transparency, accountability, and immediate reform. Every email, every phone call, and every social media post was part of a meticulous strategy. Nathaniel had never been one to waste time. The mistakes made by Officer Collins and the city were obvious, but he understood that obviousness didn't guarantee action. He had to force their hand. Inside the law office, Maya Jefferson and Nathaniel sat surrounded by stacks of case files. He handed her a folder marked Policy Violations, MPD. Start here, he said. Notice the patterns. See how many times prior complaints were ignored. Look at the training notes. They are all incomplete, sloppy, or worse, dismissive. This is not incompetence. This is systemic negligence. Maya flipped through the papers, her eyes widening. These officers have been given multiple warnings, yet nothing changes. And now Collins arrests you on your own property. This is textbook bias. Nathaniel nodded. Exactly. And our goal is not just restitution. It's correction. We'll expose the gaps in their system, the failure of supervision, and the implicit bias that allowed this to happen. We'll make sure no one else suffers because of arrogance and ignorance. Meanwhile, the city's legal team scrambled. Assistant City Attorney Laura Whitman read the complaint for the 5th time, shaking her head. We have a PR nightmare. This isn't just about a lawsuit anymore. The video is viral. The officer's record is public. Every media outlet is calling. This will go national. Back on Maplewood Avenue, Nathaniel returned to his stoop each morning. He watched the neighborhood carefully, not in fear, but in anticipation. Every passerby, every police cruiser, every tenant had become part of the ecosystem he intended to influence. He had seen too many systemic failures, too many injustices ignored. Now, armed with public attention, legal authority, and experience, he intended to rewrite the rules. Elliot Monroe had been temporarily suspended from his own social standing. The video had circulated widely, and the public reaction was swift. Comments flooded the internet, calling him out for ignorance and bias. Private messages to his social media warned him to reconsider his actions. He was humiliated, watching helplessly as his small act of complaint turned into a citywide scandal. One afternoon, as Nathaniel reviewed notes with Maya, a call came in from Captain Elena Rossi. Judge Green, the department is taking your concerns seriously. We are ready to meet for a preliminary discussion regarding policy changes, officer training, and internal procedures. Can you come to the station? Nathaniel paused, considering. I will attend. But know this is not a casual meeting. I will expect real answers and real solutions. Nothing superficial. If they think this is an apology tour, they are mistaken. At the precinct, the meeting began tensely. Nathaniel entered, Maya at his side, carrying documentation, witness statements, and photographic evidence of his injuries. Rossi greeted him respectfully. Collins was present but remained silent, the weight of his actions heavy in the room. Nathaniel opened the meeting. We are not here to discuss feelings. We are here to discuss facts, procedures, and accountability. Officer Collins' behavior is symptomatic of a larger issue. Unchecked bias, failed supervision, and deficient training. I want this addressed at the systemic level, not buried in paperwork. Collins shifted uncomfortably. I was just. Silence. Nathaniel said sharply, his courtroom tone commanding immediate attention. Your intentions are irrelevant when the outcome is unlawful detention and assault. You failed to verify property ownership, ignored witnesses, and used excessive force. This is unacceptable. Rossi nodded. We understand, Judge Green. We are prepared to implement training changes, accountability measures, and new verification procedures immediately. Nathaniel leaned forward, eyes sharp. Immediate measures are not enough. I want documented changes, a commitment to ongoing review, and accountability for officers with repeated complaints. This is not just about one man. This is about everyone in this city who cannot defend themselves when authority is misused. For the next 3 hours, the discussion was intense. Nathaniel dissected every procedure, every policy, every failed oversight. Collins remained silent, occasionally glancing at the floor, realizing how little his 5 years of experience mattered against decades of legal knowledge. Rossi took meticulous notes, showing respect and understanding for the depth of the issue. Outside the meeting room, news outlets and social media followed every development. Hashtags condemning bias, praising Green, and demanding reform trended continuously. Public pressure built like a storm ready to break. Citizens called for immediate investigations and resignations. The mayor, faced with a growing scandal, was forced to respond publicly, promising review and reform. Back at the office, Maya and Nathaniel prepared for the next phase, the civil suit against the city. We'll structure this in 3 layers, Nathaniel explained. First, the individual violation, Collins' unlawful arrest. Second, supervisory negligence, failure of internal accountability. Third, systemic reform, policies that allowed this to happen unchecked. Maya looked at him. We're going to hit them hard. The city won't have a choice. Correct, Nathaniel said. But precision is key. We do not attack emotion. We attack facts, procedures, and failures. We prove that bias, when left unchallenged, becomes lawless power. Days later, Collins was placed on administrative leave, stripped of his badge and firearm. Public records confirmed prior complaints and failures to address them. Legal analysts debated the case on national television, noting the rarity of a retired judge being subjected to such treatment and the lessons it offered for civil rights enforcement. Meanwhile, Elgit Monroe received an official eviction notice. The building's management cited harassment and nuisance clauses in his lease. The irony was unmistakable. The man who called the police to remove the lawful owner was now being forced out. Nathaniel watched from his stoop, calm as ever. Maya handed him the next case file, a young man in the southern part of the city, arrested for sitting in his own car. Nathaniel nodded. Let's begin, he said. This is not about revenge. This is about prevention, education, and accountability. One man's experience can teach thousands. The sun dipped lower over Maplewood Avenue, casting long shadows. Nathaniel Green, seated on his steps, looked out at the neighborhood he had built, both literally and metaphorically. The fight was far from over, but he had turned indignity into leverage, humiliation into strategy, and bias into a case study for reform. Every detail mattered. Each video recording, each witness statement, every report. Nathaniel cataloged them like evidence in a courtroom, knowing the city, its officials, and officers would soon realize the cost of negligence. And while the officer who had humiliated him faced career-ending consequences, Nathaniel's focus was elsewhere. He had seen too many injustices go unanswered. Now, with resources, experience, and public support, he would ensure that law, fairness, and human dignity were defended. Not just for him, but for anyone who could not fight back alone. The air grew cooler, but Nathaniel remained seated, surveying his property with a calm intensity. The story of Maplewood Avenue was no longer just about a wrongful arrest. It was about a larger battle against systemic failure. And Nathaniel Green, retired judge, owner, and now activist, was ready to lead that fight.